spent more than 200 hours playing it.
I was like, what is going on? Am I bad at this game?
It honestly feels a lot more like Monster Hunter than Elden Ring.
Itsuno-san, respectfully, is a freak, and he has made games for freaks like me.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the 20am podcast, the show about games and the people behind them. Welcome everybody to our Dragon's Dogma 2 episode. I'm so excited to have an amazing slate of guests. First of all, I want to introduce the wonderful, the beautiful, the non-human.
I'm a plant.
There we go. Pumpkin Unicorn / Rage. How are you?
Hello.
Hey,
okay.
welcome to the podcast.
Sick,
How are you today?
but it's okay.
Like the VTuber or you?
No, I'm sick in real life. What are you talking about? I'm a human behind this fucking thing.
I didn't realize.
Oh. Is that 2 minutes in?
It's okay. It's all good. And obviously joining us for this episode as well is Burham, the Arisen. Sorry. Burham, how are you? Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Good, I'm good. Thank you very much for having me. You guys can find me. Burhan is a very ambiguous name for people who don't know me. So if you guys want to find me on socials, I am Burhan Plays. That's BURHANPLAYS.
Yes.
On Twitter. I'm only on Twitter. I don't use anything else except Twitter.
And the occasional one-off stream here on
and
Twitch.
The occasional one-off stream, yes, on Twitch.
Well, welcome to you both. I wanna give a little bit of preface to who you both are and why you're joining me on this review game discussion. But for those that are new to the 20am podcast, hello everybody, welcome to the podcast. This show is about games and the people behind them. What we do here is that we talk about games, whether they be AAA or indie, feature some of the voices behind games, whether they be voice actors, programmers, artists, people that work on platform throughout the industry or whatever have you, and just kind of give some greater discussion to the games ecosystem, specifically through a Southeast Asian lens. And this episode is a little bit different because for those that wanted an episode featuring Rino, to that, the three of us say, get the hell out of here. You know what I mean? Rino doesn't have to be on every episode of the podcast. We got cooler people
Rino.
on. Okay, well, no, don't ruin the bit instantly.
I'm sorry, they only had one space for a cool person, and so they couldn't fit another one after that. When they called me up, they said, you know what, we can't fit Reno anymore. We have you now.
Can't do it. We're already maxed out.
This Reno slander, I will not stand for it.
But Reno will hopefully be back on the next episode. But it's because this episode is all about Dragon's Dogma 2. And for those that I guess are anticipating what this podcast is about, we're just going to be talking about Dragon's Dogma 2. We're going to be going into our thoughts of the game, kind of a little bit about where we are in the game, what all our impressions are, and just have a discussion about it, because this game has been kind of taking over the internet for this first half of the year, surprisingly, despite a monstrous slate of games that have come out. But before I jump into the game and we get to that discussion, I want to kind of introduce my guests that are joining us. So Pumpkin Unicorn, the reason why we got Pumpkin Unicorn on this episode is because Rach plays everything. I swear to God, everything under the sun.
That's a lie.
And we've been wanting to feature Rach. We want to have you on the podcast for so long. But would you like to introduce yourself to the folks that are listening for the first time?
Should drag you out and be like, tell the class about yourself and one fun
absolutely.
fact. And you're just standing there I like to sleep.
I mean, it's accurate, right? I'm gonna do the pump up for you if you don't do it, right? Which is one of the best artists in Southeast Asia, one of the most prolific content creators, streaming day in, day out, hailing from, I'm gonna say Malaysia, despite you residing in Singapore, because we're going to claim that. One of my favorite Malaysian VTubers. Pumpkin Unicorn is genuinely Rach, your stuff is awesome. And I think the art that you do, if you guys haven't seen that, is every booth that you do at cons, at different conventions throughout Southeast Asia is killer, and everybody loves your work, whether it be the Elden Ring prints, the Bloodborne prints. You did Card Capture Sakura recently, but then specifically Magic cards and Baldur's Gate Magic card proxies. You're one of my favorite artists, but not only that, you're an amazing VTuber and streamer, and I just thought this was would be an awesome discussion to talk about games with our first VTube guest. So thanks for coming.
Pumpkin Unicorn / Rachel is so cool that I have her art in my house. and
we just pull out the art.
I only have the art. No, it's on a wall, so I can't show you guys because I hung up a poster. So I bought a Bayonetta poster from Rachel. Yeah, so in case you don't know, only good art is hung up in the walls of my house. So if you guys see Pumpkin Unicorn boothing anywhere, you better go.
You gotta check it out.
I need to put a disclaimer that like they're hyping me up too much.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Well, I'm gonna put like B-roll of like all the amazing stuff that you do. Maybe for the people that are listening, the reason why we have Burhan on here is because Burhan is one of my favorite voices in the Southeast Asian games ecosystem, mostly through Twitter. Because I think a lot of the stuff that you do on Twitter is actually very poignant. It's actually very real, and you not only talk about funny scenarios in games and like funny topics and just like stream of consciousness thoughts, but I think a lot of the stuff that you do on Twitter, Burhan, is actually it's just like really necessary for the ecosystem, where you call people out for injustices or malpractice, if you will, whether it be in the local games ecosystem or the international games ecosystem. And so I think that voice is really necessary for Southeast Asia or games as a whole. So I just really wanted to feature people that kind of push this industry forward. And I think you definitely do that through some of the things that you share. But then specifically to Dragon's Dogma 2, you reviewed the game for Axis, if I'm correct, and you wrote the review in Bahasa. So like, I mean, give us the background to you and maybe if there's anything I'm missing there.
Okay. I mean, what Arief said is, I think I try to be a voice for good in the industry. I don't think I have that much of an impact, but I try. Because I have been in the industry for relatively very short time. I've only been here for I'm coming into my 4th year of being in the industry, if you count my esports years as well. But I have always been on the side of, we want to make sure that developers are able to make games in the most sustainable and the most, friendly way as possible. Because it always breaks my heart when people make great games and they are punished for that, which is still happening to this day. And it's even more heartbreaking when I see people who just got into the industry and they have a bad experience because of how the industry treats them, because you never know what kind of potential director, artist, programmer that you're losing when you shut the industry off from these people by giving them a traumatic experience. So which is why I always want people to know that, if you have interns, you have juniors in your studios, in your agencies, treat them well, because they are the next generation of the people who are going to make this industry bloom, right? And in terms of Dragon's Dogma, I'm just a really big fan. I love the game so much in the sense that it was one of those games that I just discovered on a whim, and ever since then, I always thought, more people should play this weird little game. And I've been a demo dog ever since.
And that's an understatement, because I swear, I said this before we recorded the episode, but like when I think of Dragon's Dogma as a franchise, I think about Burhan and his tweets and reading it in his voice. So like Burhan has been the reason why I tried out Dragon's Dogma the first time around as well. So it's amazing. But I guess without further ado, let's jump into the discussion here. So what we're going to do is, again, no spoilers for the overall game, I would say. We'll see how we finagle that as the episode goes through, but I think we're going to keep it spoiler light, especially on the story stuff. But we're going to be talking about mechanics, talk about the stuff that we love, maybe the things that we don't like as much, and just kind of get into like what are our thoughts on Dragon's Dogma 2. And before we proceed with anything else, I just want to note that Capcom did provide review copies for this game, so thank you, Capcom, for providing a review copy of the 20am podcast. And without further ado, let's jump in. So the first thing is, I want to start with everybody's kind of one sentence thoughts. What is Dragon's Dogma 2 to you? And right off the bat, I want to start with a harder question, which is, where does it stack on Game of the Year lists? Burhan, I want to start with you with like, what is Dragon's Dogma 2 to you, and where does it stack on the Game of the Year list?
As a fan, it is a move of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. 1 step back. Yeah. And in terms of putting it on my GOTY list, I'm so sorry, Capcom. It's not on the list. I love the game. I really do. I've spent more than 200 hours playing it, but it is not on my list.
I want to get into that so badly. That is shocking to me, honestly.
We'll go into that.
Rage, what is Dragon's Dogma 2 to you, and where does it stack on your Game of the Year list?
Dragon's Dogma 2 is a walking simulator.
Okay, that's not something that I've heard before.
There's so much walking in this game. It's not that I hate it, but I also hate it.
That's interesting.
Because I'm stingy with my fairy stones, unfortunately. Maybe it's a me problem, but it's like I share the same sentiment as Burhan. It's not like Game of the Year for me, unfortunately.
And I understand why Rachel is saying it's a walking simulator. Perfectly understandable.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, I didn't know how to get from one part to the other. I was like, "Where's this fast travel thing?" I was
no,
saying,
just walk.
Exactly.
Walk and suffer. Use your legs.
And for me, and I think the disclosure on my side is that, like, I am less than 10 hours into Dragon's Dogma 2, so I haven't experienced the full gamut of the game. But my one-liner is that in some parts, it reminds me so much of fantasy games that I spend thousands of hours in, like, for example, Skyrim. Like, even though they're janky, even though they have their pitfalls, I feel like it's gonna get to that state where if I do fall in love with it, it will be that game for me. But right now, it's really hard for me to, like, engage because, again, I'm really early in, but I think you get smacked by a lot of the setbacks in the first, like, part that I don't know where to land yet. But this is why I want to have this discussion with you all who've experienced a lot more of the game. But that's extremely, I don't know. I just, like, what a fascinating perspective, because I feel like everybody was really hot on it the first couple of weeks. But let's dive into it. I mean, like, what's our history with the franchise, and I guess, like, where can we provide color to the things that you guys said? Rach, Burhan is, like, the Dragon's Dogma person. Where we stick with your side? Like, did you play the first game? Like,
no, this is my first experience with Dragon's Dogma. I got, like, roped in because my fiance is a very the hype train conductor for games, basically. And so when I refuse to play games or, like, try games that don't really interest me, I'm being force-fed games. Not that it's a bad thing, but I have a very enthusiastic fiance about games. I was excited for Dragon's Dogma, actually, because it gave me a sort of, like, a simpler Elden Ring, I would say. Kind of, sort of. Like, not too much, not too hard on the combat, kind of not too difficult. But yeah, I've fallen off the train. I haven't gone back to the game in, like, a while. I haven't even finished it, so I don't know if I'll go back.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I was thinking a lot about just the vistas in Dragon's Dogma reminded me of Elden Ring as well. But again, that's why I think it's, like, a culmination of a lot of the fantasy epics. But same with me. I don't think I played. I'll tell you a quick story. So because of Burhan's fervor for Dragon's Dogma, I think last year when they first announced Dragon's Dogma 2, or a year and a half ago, I can't remember when it was. I went ahead and bought Dragon's Dogma Dark
Arisen.
Right on Steam, and I played it for a couple hours, and I was like, I can't do this. I'm so sorry, Burhan. So I was like, I'll wait for the second one. So my experience with Dragon's Dogma is also really early. But Burhan, as a person who I think has the longest history with this game, like, why? I'm just curious if you could kind of share with us what about Dragon's Dogma as a franchise did you fall in love with, and how did that kind of excitement and fervor and lionization of the first Dragon's Dogma, I guess, like, transition to where you are with Dragon's Dogma 2 right now?
So I've always been the kind of person who always checks out games that were considered weird or flawed, but kind of good. And back during the PS3 era, when Dragon's Dogma first came out, this was before the Dark Arisen edition was out. I was already into games like Demon Souls. So Demon Souls being the predecessor to Dark Souls, it wasn't as popular as Dark Souls. So Dark Souls is where the Souls franchise really took off. But Demon Souls was pretty niche. At the time when I was playing it on my PS3, this was way back in, like, middle school years for me. So about maybe more than 10 years ago. And it felt like it was just me and maybe, like, 13 people around the world were playing Demon Souls. Like, you couldn't find
online. Is it because did it have online components as well?
It did have it. Everything you've known in Dark Souls was already established in Demon Souls. Like, people living behind messages saying, "Hey, jump off this cliff. There's gonna be a treasure," and of course, it's a lie. So all those things were already in Demon Souls, and but the thing is, it wasn't as numerous as it is now. So you would hardly find messages. They would be there, but the population of players was, like, not that many. And unlike right now, Twitter wasn't really booming yet at that time. People mostly use Facebook, and on Facebook, people didn't even really talk about Demon Souls. So the same case was for Dragon's Dogma. So when it came out for the PS3 and 360, like about 10, 11 years ago, I caught wind of it, but at that time it was around me transitioning already to the PS4, and so I decided, there's a lot of other games I want to play on the PS4. I'll check out Dragon's Dogma when it's on sale or something. And cue about me being in college, which is about 7 years ago from now. It was on sale on Steam So similar case is how you bought it. So it was one of those flash sale where it was like, oh, it was like 20, 30 ringgit. So in USD, maybe $5, $10. And so I decided, oh, finally, it's time for me to check out Dark Arisen. And it was nothing I expected it to be. It was so strange and weird and also very obtuse. Like playing it, I felt like, oh, there are so many things in this game that makes me not want to enjoy it. But at the same time, there's so many things that no other game has done. Like I'm always there to try things out where a developer is willing to do things that, you know what, this is probably going to piss some people off, but this is what I want. I want to try this. And Dragon's Dogma was a very pure manifestation of that from Hideaki Itsuno-san, the director of the game. And so ever since I discovered it and finished it 7 years ago, every time somebody mentions it online or in a conversation in real life, I would think, oh, I should go home, reinstall and replay Dark Arisen. So which is why I've replayed it about 6-7 times at this point. So it's one of those games where once you understand the flow and the structure, regardless of how weird it is, you wrap your head around it and you're like, okay, I just have to do this, and then that's how I have fun with this game. So yeah, ever since then, I've always been like a kind of a cheerleader for the game. Every time it's on sale on Steam, I'm saying, guys, you gotta try it. You gotta try Dragon's Dogma. It's okay if you don't like it, but what if you do? What if it's the kind of weird stuff that you're into? Because it is the kind of weird stuff I'm into. So
I'm gonna clip that out of context so badly. Like I don't know what that would work for. But I want to go deeper there. That's really interesting, and I want to get Rachel's thoughts here as well. But like you said that the game does stuff that other games don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really am trying to understand this. Like, what about the first Dragon's Dogma is that for you, Burhan? And then maybe after that, Rach, I'd love to gauge your thoughts on what Dragon's Dogma 2 does that's a little bit different, that was interesting enough for you to play through it and still go through the game. But Burhan, what about the first Dragon's Dogma? Or Dragon's Dogma as a franchise really sets it apart from other games?
So I would nail it down to two main mechanics or features of the game, which is number one, the pawn system, where you would create your own pawn, or for those who've never played Dragon's Dogma, so you have like pretty much your own sidekick, which is a character you fully customize and create. You can choose the class and everything. And then it would learn through AI, through behavior, by observing you and looking at the world, and learn how to navigate the world, learn how to complete quests. So you have basically like a mercenary that you create who's always with you. And the unique thing about the game is that everybody else does the same thing, and then they can lend out their mercenary or their pawns, right? So you go into this big room or this void where you can borrow and choose other people's pawns. And this is where the system of the game becomes really unique to me, because no other game has done that before, where according to Itsuno-san himself, and you guys can find this in the talk that he gave at GDC 2013, he was inspired by online forums. So he was thinking, it was called the BBS, the Board Bulletin System, if I'm not mistaken, when it comes to online forums. So he was thinking, instead of having a multiplayer game where I have to co-op with other people, like find a lobby and whatnot, why not we rent out each other's mercenaries? So inside the concept document of the game, there were two names for the concept of Dragon's Dogma. One, it was the BBS RPG, which was the Bulletin Board System RPG. And then there was the CMC, so which was the Custom Mercenary character, if I'm not mistaken. So it was revolving around that. And I don't blame anyone who listens to this and think, I still don't get it. Because Itsuno-san, in that GDC talk, he said, when I was talking about this to my own team in Capcom, most of them didn't understand. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. In fact, some people in Capcom only understood what he wanted when the game was shipped and they played it, the retail version they played it, that's only when they understood, like, oh, that's what you were going for. So it is, I would say that's why it's so unique, in the sense that nothing has been done that way. But it was special to me because I was one of those people who didn't always like playing online. Also because I grew up in a house that we didn't always have money to have internet connection. So whatever console or PC I had wasn't always connected to the internet. So having a game where even with slow internet, it was fine, because you only had to synchronize or do the network handshake when you start the game, choose your pawns to rent out. And then at the end of the game, when you return those pawns, and they would synchronize with the server and then collect all the information like, oh, hey, you brought this pawn out to do ABC. So now they're going to learn things from those things. So it was a very good thing for me as a young kid who had very slow connection. And I was like, hey, I don't have to be connected all the time. And yet I can have a party where I go out adventuring with. And then the second thing that made it super special, stop me if I'm dragging this too long.
No.
Because I can yap on and on about
This
Dragon's
is
Dogma.
your episode, Burham. Why do you think we brought you on here? The Dragon's Dogma person. Go ahead.
Yap away.
So, and then the second thing was I would say the very punishing systems that were available in the game. So again, coming off from Demon's Souls, I was into that era of game where, a lot of games are so like kind to you. And that's not a bad thing. Like games would show you, here's the objective marker, go here. Here's who you should talk to next. So Dragon's Dogma was different in the sense that, oh, hey, you're going to carry like 10 bars of gold. Good luck. You're not going to be able to run. Give that to your pawn. Oh, what's that? You made a pawn who's weak? Tough luck. Now neither of you can carry that much gold. Leave some behind. We don't care. You're not going to make that money today. So for me, it was like, oh, so I actually have to plan out my adventures before I go out. I actually have to rent a pawn who's strong enough to carry my stuff. So engaging with those systems, it made me think, oh, you know what? Every time I get out of the town or the safe areas, I have to carefully plan my adventures first. Like I have to think of everything like, oh, what if along the way, if I'm taking like an ox cart, which is the game's roundabout way of a fast travel, where you take like pretty much a taxi from one town to another, because you can get intercepted and something destroys your ox cart. And then you have to walk all the way. You just have to walk all the way there, right? So I have to plan out for that. Like, oh, wait, what happens if that happens? Can I survive the journey all the way there? And so I appreciated those mechanics. And which is why I also perfectly understand when someone's like, oh, it's so troublesome. It's so much hassle to play this game because it's so unfriendly to you. And I'm not the kind of person who would say, oh, you have to get good. You have to like engage with the systems better. You suck at this game. It's like, no, you're not a bad gamer if you can't do that. It's just that Itsuno-san, respectfully, is a freak. And he has made games for freaks like me. So when that happens and you feel like, oh, I can't engage with this game, that's fine. That's fine. Because Itsuno-san, if you read his interviews, you watch the videos that he gives representations on, he's focused on a vision. And his vision is, okay, I want to create a world that's punishing. I also want you to be able to rent out pawns from other people. And then the adventures, they're going to kick your ass if you don't plan properly. And so some people will not be able to connect with that. And that's fine. But if you listen to that kind of synopsis or that kind of summary of a game and you're like, oh, I'm into that, try it out. So like, I've always been intrigued by how focused basically the vision for the game is. So because even when you guys look at the discussions of the game online, it's so divisive because some people are like, oh my God, I wish he could just let us do this because that would make the game so much more convenient or so much more friendly to newcomers. And I don't think they'll ever patch those things in because Itsuno-san is like, oh, no, wait, this is my vision. I wanted the game to be like that. I want you to go through that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be why.
And I think there's so much to pick apart there, Burhan. I think I just want to mention a couple things. I think your note on the state of games back then, right? Whether it be like internet connections. I think PS3 was really that era where like we started to get more internet-friendly games, and now I think everything kind of lives on the cloud and everything is internet-based, right? But it's really fascinating to see the evolution of that. So yes, like Dragon's Dogma, I think were some of the progenitors of like making that very mainstream, even though it may not have been as successful back then. But I love that comparison. But I think at the end of the day, you're right. It's like you can feel that there is vision. You can feel that there is purpose. But to your note on like this game is supposed to be punishing. Like when I faced I think it was a Minotaur early in the game in Dragon's Dogma 2, I died like 17 times or something like that. And I was texting Raid. I was like, what is going on? Why am I bad at this game? I don't get it. Like I know there's a hard boss and maybe you could prepare a little bit better, but like I'm getting my ass kicked.
It's not a boss, Arief. It's not a boss.
Not even a boss. Not even a boss.
It's not even a boss.
It's just a normal beast that's like hanging out. But
yeah, it's just a big boy.
Yeah, exactly. So like I just really empathize, but then I think after, when I did eventually on my 20th try, like defeated it or something by kind of cheesing my angle of like shooting arrows into it, I was like, oh, I think I understand how they're trying to set this up and what they're actually trying to tell you about mechanics, planning things out, and going in prepared. But not to take that part of the conversation forward, Pumpkin Unicorn, Rach. What are your thoughts on like anything that Burhan said there? But most importantly, I think for your perspective is like, again, I know you play a lot of games, but like, what makes Dragon's Dogma 2 maybe on the positive side? Like, what did it offer you that other games maybe didn't offer? Or do you completely disagree, where you're still kind of like not as hot on the game at all?
I enjoyed it. I didn't say I didn't. I honestly enjoyed Dragon's Dogma. It gives me a nice middle ground between like the super like hard game, like the Soulsborne series kind of game, and like it still gives me the RPG elements that I enjoy, and the power spike of like being at max level with that class, and you're like, oh my god, I can blow shit up now. That kind of feeling. And then when you start a new class, you're like, oh, I'm bad again.
Yeah, that RPG, like I guess, like how does that RPG, is that kind of one of the shining moments of the game for you?
It is.
Because I have my thoughts on that. Like, is it the class system?
I enjoy the class system very, very much. And towards the later parts of the game, everybody knows this, where you get to unlock that one class that allows you to basically mix the other classes. So you can basically dual wield the classes, and you would have access to the plethora of like skills that both classes have.
That's fucking awesome.
Yeah, so the combat later on, when you get more powerful, Arief, trust me, it honestly feels a lot more like Monster Hunter than Elden Ring, because what's the class with the spear?
The Mystic Spearhand.
Oh, that's my fucking favorite class. Yeah. It reminds me of the Insect Glaive in Monster Hunter, which is also my favorite weapon. And the combat is literally the same, where you're just flying around, jumping around, doing gymnastics around the enemy, and you feel absolutely badass doing it. But you got to get there, Arief. Trust me.
And I think that's the issue. It's like, I know what the gameplay looks like later on, but that is not my gameplay right now.
Yeah,
I'm just like one arrow. Maybe I'll do a combo here and there. But like when I see people playing online, it's like, it's insane. But Rex, that's really interesting. Like Monster Hunter, I think like do you think there's actual influences, and I'd love to get both your takes on this, between Dragon's Dogma and Monster Hunter, because I wanted to talk about like what other games Dragon's Dogma kind of reminded you of, right? Because again, maybe just for the purposes of people that are listening, this review and this kind of discussion is less about the story, less about the like play by play, but more about like the game as a whole and how we kind of interacted and what it reminds us of, right? But Monster Hunter is also kind of developed by Capcom. Like, do you think there was like integrations between those two teams or discussions between those two teams that may have played into each other outside of that kind of instance, Rach? Or I just like the larger question to the both of you is like, what does Dragon's Dogma 2 really remind you of? Like, is it games in the genre? Like, I know I mentioned Elder Scrolls, Skyrim. Elden Ring, I think, is like on top of everybody's mind, especially as Erdtree is slated for release later this year. Like, where does Dragon's Dogma sit in that kind of like compendium, or what other games does it remind you of?
For me, if we're talking about Dragon's Dogma 2, I am mostly just reminded of the first game because of how similar they are. They are so similar. So if I'm going to draw comparisons for the first game, it would be that actually there wasn't much that was similar to it. It felt like when I did play it finally, I had already played the Souls games, I already played Skyrim. And believe it or not, one of the main inspirations for the first game, according to the concept document for the game, was Oblivion, the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. So because at that time in Japan, there were not a lot of open world action RPGs that Itsuno-san could use as a reference. So he looked outwards globally and he saw that Oblivion was a good reference for that. And also because Capcom gave him a sales target, like, okay, we need you to sell X million amount of copies. And he had to find something global to say, look, we can do this well if we can nail these mechanics. And so one cool thing about Itsuno-san's history is that he is a Devil May Cry veteran. So he was working on DMC3, DMC4. I believe that was his last project before he did Dragon's Dogma. So he did DMC4 and then Dragon's Dogma. And then he went on to also work on DMC5, which is the latest Devil May Cry. So if you guys played Devil May Cry 5, that was the same guy who directed Dragon's Dogma 2. So, but it's really cool that Rachel mentioned what's it called in Monster Hunter, the spear weapon,
the insect glaive.
The insect glaive, because I played Monster Hunter World and Iceborne. Those are the only Monster Hunter I played, and the whole time I was trying out the Mystic Spearhand class. That was the exact same thought I had, which was, this feels like it was inspired from the insect glaive, because there was a lot of because if you guys have played Monster Hunter before, the insect glaive is a very aerial weapon. So you would launch yourself up from the ground and then do aerial combos. And so the Mystic Spearhand had its own like set of aerial combos as well. And so that felt like, okay, Itsuno-san may have not worked on Monster Hunter, but because he comes from Capcom and the team internally is also Capcom, there was probably references here and there. And if you've played Devil May Cry, you can definitely see how some of the combat moves for the warrior and thieves are definitely like a reference, heavily referencing some of the faster moves from Devil May Cry, or even the slower ones as well. But for me, the biggest point of reference that I could draw from whenever I'm playing a Dragon's Dogma game, whether Dark Arisen or 2, is that it feels pretty much like if I wanted to play Skyrim, but the third-person gameplay was done more in depth. Like Skyrim, I feel feels more like a first-person game. Like I think the third-person camera can sometimes be a hit or miss. But Dragon's Dogma is like, hey, what if we pull the camera out and then really go in on the RPG systems, right? So that was my closest comparison I had at the time. But it also speaks to how unique the game is, because I can't really draw a lot of references. In fact, I was more reminded of fantasy anime and manga whenever I would play Dragon's Dogma, whether the first game or the second. Especially if in recent times you guys watch Dungeon Meshi or Soso no Frieren Beyond Journey's End. So whenever you read, or if you're more of a boomer, or if you're old, maybe you've watched Record of Lodos War, Lodos no Tetto Senki, right? So all these anime, fantasy anime and manga, there's always that feeling of a complete party where it's like, oh, you've got the healer, the warrior, the usual setup, right? And Dragon's Dogma really drives home that feeling. So if you've watched or read a recent fantasy piece of media and you feel, God, I want to go on an adventure with a full party, but I don't want to do it multiplayer, like Dragon's Dogma hits that vibe for me. It really does, because like, okay, I'm going to go into the void, hire a few pawns. Okay, you're going to be my warrior and you're going to be my healer, and I have my pocket archer right behind me, and I'm the mage guy.
Oh my God, like, I get so attached to my pawns. I can't.
Exactly, right.
I'm just like, oh man, you're under level now. I gotta fire you and get somebody else.
Exactly.
I'm like, oh man.
So I'm always drawing from that feeling.
Yeah, that's hilarious, because you're right. It's just like I'm developing a relationship, with my main pawn, and things are going really well, and I think we've been through a couple adventures together. But sometimes you just meet somebody else and like, hey, you want to hang out? You know what I mean? You want to go beat that Cyclops together? Come on. And it's just like, you're right, that jovial feeling of party gathering, right, is something that is so common practice for pieces within this genre, whatever medium it may be, whether it be games like novels or movies or anime or whatever have you, right? But it is the epitome of being able to enact that and have your own agency in the game to bring that upon yourself, rather than just have to watch it on a screen, right? Rach, how do we feel about any of those things? Or, I mean, going back to some of the original questions, is like, what does the Dragon's Dogma 2 or Dragon's Dogma as a franchise remind you of in games?
I haven't actually played a lot of games in my lifetime because my parents refused to buy me games.
Let's talk about that for another 10 minutes, actually. Let's unpack that. Like, is that why you're playing so many games now in your adult life?
Because I have a very enthusiastic gamer fiance, all right? And he's like, you've got to experience everything now because you didn't when you were a child.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, I played a lot of MMORPGs. And if we're all old enough to live back in the dial-up internet days, it was an absolute nightmare, okay? You couldn't patch the game. You couldn't do anything. Okay, if someone calls your house, that's it. It's gone. No more internet for you. And so that was my gaming experience. Basically, I was trying to play MMOs with dial-up internet. It was okay, I guess. But that was it. And it was me trying to tell my parents to buy the Cita Rompa.
Oh, the pirated CDs.
The pirated CDs that are like super cheap, but you have to like open the crack with like loud ass music. For the code.
The key gens.
The key gens. Dude, we've talked about that so many times on this podcast. Like in the history of the 20th podcast, we've talked about that exact scenario.
No, and sometimes the freaking CDs don't work, and you have to go back to the guy and be like, "Hey, man, you lied to me. This game don't work."
Yeah. I could play Warcraft 3: The Frozen Throne because of that.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't really have a lot of like point of reference to what Dragon's Dogma 2 is to me, because I feel like maybe one of the more recent RPGs that I played would probably be Elden Ring, but it was like last year. I did pick up Last Epoch again during the downtime, but never got back to it. What? I played Elder Scrolls as well. But I think like what Burhan said, it's just Elder Scrolls, but like less jank. But I kind of like the jank. I kind of don't like the jank. So I feel like some games I'm like close one eye. I'm okay with the jank. It makes things funny, and I'm fine with it.
Yeah, the jank is an interesting topic, and I want to kind of pose a question to you both, and maybe we transition to a conversation of like, we talked a little bit about the highlights of Dragon's Dogma 2 and our experiences with it, and kind of like some of the ethos, some of the history, and like why the game is why it is, right? But I'd love to get into maybe some of your both personal experiences with the like play by play of the game, which is on the negative side, which is this? My question is kind of like, is this a modern game? Because that's a question that I've been seeing a lot in the discourse, especially over the past month. And this is like a month and a half since launch, right? If I'm not mistaken. Like, so the question that I have is, does this feel like a game that is made in 2024? And the follow-up to that is like, what are the setbacks of your Dragon's Dogma 2 experience? Burhan, I want to slide in some of your thoughts there specifically.
It's very hard for me to differentiate the design from the visuals, because for the longest of time, Dark Arisen has not appeared ugly to me. Like every time I play it, I'm like, oh wow, this still looks good. Every time I play that game, which is like almost 10 years old, I boot it up and I'm like, it doesn't look too bad.
I'm gonna cut you off. That game is ugly as heck. It's as in like not in like a mean way. It's just like it is dated.
The game looks fine. Shut up. All right.
Okay, maybe my character looked like an absolute caveman. That's why I look so ugly. Like my character in Dark Arisen looks so ugly.
No, because
screenshots of Dark Arisen, and I think to my standards, like the graphics look great for an aged game as Dark Arisen is.
The thing is that every time before I reinstall the game, I was thinking, God, I have to be ready for how ugly this game is going to look. And the moment I boot it up, it's like, no, this is pretty okay. I'm okay with that. So imagine the moment I boot up Dragon's Dogma 2 and I see an open world rendered using RE engine, I couldn't divorce that from the design anymore. I was like, oh, okay, this is new. This is shiny now. Right. And one of the things that in my Axis Bahasa Melayu review that I kept mentioning at least 2 or 3 times is that this is a beautiful looking game. This is an amazing looking game, because technically speaking, what they've done here is extremely impressive, because for those who don't know, this is the first open world game rendered using the RE engine. So the RE engine is well known for doing for being used for the Resident Evil remakes, which are all in very constrained and controlled environments. So prior to this, the biggest game they had to render a big environment for using the same engine was Monster Hunter Rise. And to be fair, Monster Hunter Rise is not a very high fidelity game because it was made and optimized for the Nintendo Switch. So this could be seen as Capcom's first foray into an open world game using their engine, which is much more difficult than most people would think. Which is why when the game came out, it did not have an uncapped frame rate mode. It did not have a 60 frames per second mode, because I think they couldn't have the time or the budget to fit that within the release schedule, which is why they're working on it now. If I'm not mistaken, it's going to be patched in the future. Now you can leave it uncapped, but it's not a stable 60, because again, I think it's a very challenging thing to optimize an engine made for small environments, and then you scope it out all the way to this gigantic world, and it's gigantic. And so, does it feel current gen? So when I was playing this game, yes, because the thing about making open world games is that you're always in the development process is that you're always afraid of being scoped out of your capabilities. Like, okay, we're gonna make like a 15 by 15 map, kilometer per square, or maybe 10 by 10, and sooner than later, a lot of developers are like, oh crap, we don't know what to fill it up with. It's very difficult to just fill a map up with stuff, which is why Skyrim to this day remains a very fun game to play, because somehow they've made a map where you walk in one direction, you keep going for 15 minutes, you're going to find something, and it could be interesting. It might be repetitive, but you're going to be somewhat intrigued, right? And Elden Ring is still one of those games that manages to do that. So when Dragon's Dogma tries to do it, especially in the sequel, what I felt was that, okay, you guys made a big world, and there's not much to see, in my opinion, but there's so much to encounter. So like you could go off in one direction, you find a cave, and it might not appear significant, but here you go. There's a lich boss in there. It's gonna kick your ass, so you're gonna die, and then maybe you're gonna come back one day when you're a bit stronger. So the exploration is more tethered to what punishing thing is awaiting you in there. So like going through all those motions, I did feel that, yeah, this is definitely a next-gen game in terms of its design, its scope. The only thing that held it back for me was that it felt, and I gotta be fair, I have to spend a bit more time on this so that I can explain the nuances. So yes, as a fan of the franchise, I did feel as if they played it too safe. Like, there's so many things that they brought from the first game and from Dark Arisen, and yet there were still so many things that they didn't bring over that I felt like, hey, you know what? How come we still have this issue from the first game, or this thing that we felt that you could have expanded upon and you didn't expand upon it in the second game? But at the same time, for those of you who have played the game, you'll find this interesting thing about the game, which is when you start, it doesn't say Dragon's Dogma 2, it just says Dragon's Dogma. Right, the title card does not have the 2 in it, which to me, I interpret it as Itsuno-san and his team saying, look, it's been more than 10 years since the first game. We're pretty sure no one remembers. Like, yes, you guys have been buying Dark Arisen, but you guys are freaks. Just you bunch of people have been buying it. But most people do not know about Dragon's Dogma. So we cannot just flashbang them with this new game and say, hey, here's the new open world punishing game you've been waiting for. Like, we're not FromSoft. We don't have the clout to say, hey, we're making an Elden Ring competition, right? So I feel as if this is like them saying, look, we're going to restart. We're going to do things again. We're going to ease people into it. So fans still have a few things you can enjoy. Like we have few new classes. We finally have the Beast Run, the Beast Race for you guys to play around with. But overall, it's more or less the same game from the first game. Because we want to like ease in people into the franchise, because I'm pretty sure now that the game has sold so well, it did sell like 2 million copies within like the first 2-3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong on that, but it sold pretty well in the opening week. And so the potential for another sequel or for more expansions is there. And then according to the concept document that Isuno-san prepared all the way back in 2008 or 9, before he even like started development for 1, he wanted companions to also be stuff like creatures, like pets. Like he even used the term Pikachu, like, oh, you could have something like a Pikachu as your pawn. So I think that was something they didn't have the time and budget for this time as well. Because for those who don't know, if you want to create, the reason why you have humans and beastrons as your pawns, they use the same rig, so they use the same skeleton. So development-wise, you don't have to make an entire new set of skeletons and animations for it, which is very difficult to do. So if let's say they want to do, okay, we want to make a pet version, you have a dog or a Monster Hunter equivalent of a Palamute or a Palico, sorry. That's a whole new rigging system. That's a whole new set of animations. And I'm hoping that Isuno-san views, Capcom and Isuno-san views the success of Dragon's Dogma 2 as, hey, people are into this weird stuff I made. Let's make more of it. Let's add more into it.
Right,
so yeah,
I can't wait for like, Sims 2 pets is like Dragon's Dogma 2 pets. It's just like, you know what I mean? But I think just a transition as well as I mean like Rach, I want to get like full Unleashed. Like what are the limits? Like genuinely, like because I think credit where credit is due, but then on the opposite side, right? Like you bring up some really interesting points about like what what is behind the jank, or what is behind that experience that may be limiting as well, despite maybe some of the beautiful parts. But Rach, like being a maybe newer person into this franchise, like what are the limitations of this game in your opinion? Like, were there moments where you're just banging your head against the wall? It's like, why is this game this way? Because I definitely had.
No, because I'm stubborn. I played Elden Ring, my good sir.
So your tolerance for mechanics like that?
Yeah, like, okay, so the whole backstory with Elden Ring was that, like, I was pretty adamant that I was not gonna play the game. So my fiance was like, just try. And I begrudgingly made a wretch. It's the shittiest class to start with. You unga bunga with a club and you're naked and you just run out. And I spent a good entire day sitting there beating my head against the sentinel that was in the starting area.
Oh, and the forest sentinel.
Yeah. And my fiance was like, you know, you can leave, right? And you can come back later when you're stronger. And I'm like, no, I wanna beat the shit out of this guy now. He's been beating my ass. I got this. So I'm like, unga bunga, beat the guy. And then I have the weapon, right? I don't even have the strength to use it. And I was like, okay, cool. Moving on with my life. I from that moment I was like, all right, I'm stubborn enough to play games.
Dragon's Dogma too.
Yeah, I'm stubborn enough to play hard games apparently.
Yeah.
So
I honestly think if you can stomach Elden Ring, Dragon's Dogma is actually pretty manageable.
Yeah, it
Elden
is.
Ring is way more punishing than Dragon's Dogma.
It is. Dragon's Dogma is like a chill. It's a chill time, you know. And if you like Elden Ring, you'll like Dragon's Dogma because Dragon's Dogma will feel like a picnic.
I'm gonna interject by saying that like y'all are absolutely wrong. Are you kidding me? Like the reason. I mean, this is really interesting.
That's what you sound like.
Hear me out, Rach. Hear me out. Because like my experience with Dragon's Dogma is really interesting because that one like Minotaur non-boss fight, right? That experience for me is like if you were in a Souls game, you know that the whole point of the Souls game is that you respawn and you go and you try again. You heal. You go back to the start with all your flasks, all your things back on top, and then you go and then you just keep trying again and again and again at that base level of like where you start from. In Dragon's Dogma, when you die, your health goes down even further and further. So the more
this was so new for me as well. I was like, wait, why is my health low? I was like, oh.
At some point, my health bar was like this when I was fighting that giant Minotaur thing. You know what I mean? So like,
yeah, I've been there.
It's like I don't know if it's actually more punishing or less punishing, and they're punishing in different ways. But Burhan, to go back to your point, it's mechanics that are punishing. It's actually not the actual combat and the fighting and the techniques, right, that you need to master. It's the mechanics of the game itself. But Rach, I really still want to dig deeper here on like some of the other limitations. Like, was there anything else that kind of tainted your view on Dragon's Dogma? Because like you said, after this, you weren't motivated to go back. Like, what is it about the deterrence to go back to Dragon's Dogma 2?
Actually, it's not the game that like pushed me away. I just have like too much on my plate right now.
Yeah.
It's a very time-consuming game. It's one of those games where you have to be prepared to like put in hundreds of hours. It's kind of like Baldur's Gate 3. You know, when you start it, you're kind of like, all right. But you leave it hanging and then you're kind of like, oh man, I don't even know when I'm going to come back. Because it took me hundreds of hours to finish my first playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3. And then I started my Dark Urge. And I still haven't like left the first area and I haven't gone back. And I was like, oh man, I'm going to do Dark Urge and I'm going to experience a whole bunch of different things. But I haven't gone back because it's gonna be, I know it's gonna be like a whole other 100 hours of like experience, and I don't have the time.
But you know what's super interesting about that, and because Burhan, your point earlier is like, just to mention this, is like, you know, when it starts with Dragon's Dogma instead of Dragon's Dogma 2, I'm reminded about the fact that like we just got Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in the same month, if I'm not mistaken, or in that same like general time frame. And to me, that's people, the limitations of that game is because it's a sequel, you can't really start off with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. But then it got me thinking, I was like, the amount of games that have been coming out has been ridiculous. And I know it's a joke, and I know we're joking about that now, Rach, right? But like that's a very serious thing. It's like, where does Dragon's Dogma sit in this compendium and this slate of games in 2024, because it's been such a packed year. Like, I'm curious if that's actually what's going to hinder people thinking about this game at Game of the Year time, or just in its history, right? Because it's been inundated by other great games. But I don't know. We'll see where that ends up. But Burhan, you wanted to mention something?
Oh no, I just wanted to touch on a great point that was brought up by Rachel in regards to how it's hard to come back to a game like Dragon's Dogma, because for me, it's the same thing. Like, if I'm going to play a playthrough of Dragon's Dogma, it's something I hunker down with. Like, okay, for the next few weeks, like, aside from work and everything personal, I'm not going to touch another game at all. I'm just going to play Dragon's Dogma. It's because there's a routine to it. Like every time I log on to Dragon's Dogma, I boot it up and I'm like, okay, I got to remember what was the last thing I did. Like, did I manage my inventory? Did I?
Yeah, it's like, what am I doing today? Yeah.
You have to plan it out. Like, okay, who was the last pawn? Did we level up? Did I send back the pawns that are under leveled? Wait, are you guys under leveled? And then you're like, wait. Did you guys have any of the loot that I collected? Have you passed it back to me? So there's a bunch of checklists you have to go through.
It's all like housekeeping.
Yeah.
It's housekeeping. Yeah, there is housekeeping, right? So because that's what it is. At the end of every Dragon's Dogma session, you're like, okay, pass me the loot that I
back to the inn, empty your inventory.
Yeah, empty your inventory. Yeah, I can't because here's the thing. Dragon's Dogma doesn't warn you if, let's say, hey, we went on an adventure and I don't have enough capacity to carry this stuff. You, my strong pawn that I rented from someone, carry this for me back. So you guys go back. And if you forgot and you're like, bye, I'm going to send you back to your owner. And then the game doesn't warn you, oh, hey, he has your stuff. The game doesn't warn you. The game's like,
camping gear.
My camping gear the stuff goes into your storage.
Really? Because
it goes into your storage.
Because I remember when I played,
I had that panic attack. Because I had a pawn that was carrying like a huge.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was carrying. I had a pawn carrying like a huge ass hammer that I got from like some big guy, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna use it later, but I can't carry it because I'm a weak ass little Khajiit looking thing. So I'm like, you carry.
I actually experimented with it because I wanted to put that in my review. So I was thinking, okay, what happens if I do that? So I let someone actually bring back gold ore, and I was saying, okay, I'm going to put this gold ore in you, I'm going to send you back, and it disappeared. It never went back into my inventory.
It goes into your storage. It doesn't go into your inventory. It goes into your storage.
Oh my god, I have to double check.
Yeah, I need to look at that as well.
I had the biggest panic attack because that one pawn was carrying the cool hammer, right? And I sent it away, and I was like, I did it on stream as well. I was like, the hammer, my loot.
Yeah, that's
and then one of my they thought of that.
Yeah, one of my chat was like, "Oh no, it goes to your storage," and I was like, "Oh, thank God. It was in my storage, by the way."
and I wanted to touch on slightly about the whole the very packed release window within the first quarter of the year where we have so many games, and I think we have enough titles for us to classify things into how they've become successful or otherwise. For example, we've seen Helldivers 2 explode very, very much. And then you have Dragon's Dogma. And then you also have titles like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And so what I'm seeing is that there are a discrepancy in terms of how relatively new or culturally memorable a sequel is. For example, Dragon's Dogma 2 has this leeway of being like more than 15 years old at this point. And so the last game was practically 7-8 years ago. And so people have forgotten, and you can repackage it, make it look like a polished version of the old one, and people will be like, hey, I want to check this out. Rebirth has this burden of coming off from Remake, which was only a few years ago. And it's like, okay, you know what? If you didn't play Remake, you can't go into Rebirth. There is a direct connection to that. And so Helldivers 2 is also something spared of that as well. It's like, oh, if you've never played Helldivers 1, no problem, because sure, it's set in the same satirical tone as 1, but we've changed the gameplay. It's not the same anymore. So go ahead and play Helldivers 2. And then on the same side as Rebirth, you've got games like Yakuza Infinite Wealth. Exactly. Like a Dragon. It's called Like a Dragon now. So Infinite Wealth has this, it's hanging on the coattails of Like a Dragon 7, and also the bridge between them, which is Like a Dragon Gaiden. So it's like, yeah, you can play Infinite Wealth immediately. That's no problem. But you're missing out on so much characterization by not playing 7 and Gaiden. So it's like a lot of fans will tell you, hey, maybe you should check out 7 first before you go into Infinite Wealth, because it's like Ichiban's story. So it's like we can see right now what happens when companies bring back IPs that are either dormant or less culturally memorable, or IPs that are still relevant within people's minds. Like, okay, we have to play off that. And for Rebirth in particular, I honestly don't know what to expect of how it's doing commercially, because there's always rumors and people's whispering oh, it did so poorly because it's not selling very well. It's not selling very well, sorry. But for me, it's okay, it is a sequel to a game, and it's also a PS5 exclusive. Those are very big factors to think about. So I'm curious to see how are they? But then again, critically, Rebirth has been touted as a huge improvement over Remake. So it's like everyone's saying it's good, you should get it, and at the same time, there's people whispering not enough people are buying it. So yeah, and like Dragon's Dogma, I think it is actually surprising to me as a Dragon's Dogma fan to see Dragon's Dogma 2 selling so well, because I was expecting like the same bunch of freaks that I come from are just gonna get it and then nobody else. It's like, oh, we've been waiting 10 years for this. Let's go get it.
I mean, I'm pretty sure people got it because the freaks were hyping it up.
Yeah, like you, bro.
Yes. That has proven to be a successful marketing tactic for a lot of franchises, which is you get your most like hyped up freaks to shout about something, and normal people are like, oh, the freaks are pretty into that. I should check it out.
People are into it. Oh my god, let me go check it out real quick.
I want to go back to June's Twitter like history and just see how many times that he's talked about how excited he is for Dragon's Dogma. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I know he's really excited.
I totally.
But he rolled credits so quickly, and I'm like, bro, you didn't experience like majority of the game. Like you didn't see any of it.
Yeah.
No, literally the only other person I saw on my timeline who was as excited as me for Dragon's Dogma 2 was June. Like, no one else tweeted as much as he did. And
okay.
funny thing is that we would often interact with each other on our Dragon's Dogma tweets.
Okay, like I like to manage my expectations. I don't want to be hyped up about something and be like, oh my god, I'm so excited, and then go into it and be like, oh man, I'm sad. Like if I go in and be like, oh, okay, this is kind of mid, and then be like, oh shit, man, it's fucking good.
Yeah,
you know, like I gotta manage my expectations a little bit.
And that's where I kind of stand with this game. And I want to kind of close off this episode by kind of asking you both if you have any final thoughts on the franchise, our discussion today, and kind of like what is Dragon's Dogma 2 in the compendium of games, if you will, right? And like, is it worthy to keep continuing to talk about this game moving forward in this year, but also in the years to come in this genre? But my like close to all of that is like, you kind of nailed it, Rach. I was like thinking about this where I didn't want to come in with high expectations. I actually really didn't like my short experience with Dark Arisen, but also because granted, I was playing on a really bad computer and like it couldn't handle a lot of the graphics that were going on. And then the second thing is like I didn't invest enough time in the mechanics. But with Dragon's Dogma 2, I'm actually really intrigued to play more because I want to get to that state where you get all powerful and use magic and melee all at the same time and move around. Because there's some movements and combos I can pull off right now super early in game that makes me feel that joy of like, this is an awesome combat action RPG. And then also the kind of like back-end systems of like managing, inventory is one side of things, but managing class systems and like your pawn systems, like all of these has the ingredients for it to be my fantasy RPG game. But I don't know if it's going to be that, but I'm still intrigued to give it another shot. Whether it kind of sticks with me for the rest of the year, I don't know. And whether it sits, I don't know as well, because I think the limitations are getting to me. Like the frustrations are making me be like, I don't really want to boot that up right now. But I'm actually a bit more optimistic because maybe I've had like very low expectations or not that phenomenal of like an experience with the first title. But I kind of want to leave it to the both of you. Do you have any closing thoughts on Dragon's Dogma, and if there's anything else you want to share about this game?
I need like a VFX turn off button, because every time I have a sorcerer on my pawns, I can't see anything. I can't. It's like meteors and then like the tornado, and then I can't see. I don't know where is my character. And I'm like playing the Mystic Spear, and I'm climbing on the thing, but like I'm like, where am I? And I feel like I have not reached the end game, and my feelings might be wrong. Burham, you can correct me, but I feel like end game may be a little bit boring and stale, because it's kind of like I'm at a point where now I'm no longer afraid of the Minotaur. I'm no longer afraid of the ogre. I'm just running at these guys and murdering them. I don't think anymore. Because back when I first started Dragon's Dogma 2, I was like, oh shit, man, these guys are beating my ass. I'm scared. And I'm running away from these guys. But I'm at a point in the game where I'm like, Minotaur, beat his ass. Ogre, beat his ass. Cyclops, beat his ass. And I'm at a point where if I see a dragon, I'm beating his ass as well. And I feel like maybe endgame is going to be real boring, because I'm just going to beat everyone's ass, right? There's no one else to scare me anymore. And maybe that's the whole purpose of the game, but I feel like combat does run dry after a while. And like the only reason why it's interesting for me is really because of the class I chose to play. Because I could really choose to play a sorcerer and stand back and throw meteors and everything immediately dies. And to choose to play Mystic Spearhand is basically just me like, I want to do more in this battle than just stand behind and throw meteors and make sure everything dies. It's kind of boring. But like, I feel like that's where the end game is going, right? Am I?
I think you're pretty much on the spot there. Yeah, you're pretty much on point. I've gone through the end game 3 times at this point. In fact, because the end game, not to spoil anything to anyone who hasn't played it, there is a certain stage past the game where the game clearly tells you, hey, you're in the end game now. This is where you fight really tough monsters. And at that point, I was excited. I was so excited, like, oh, hey, because Dark Arisen has something similar where the whole world changes, and then it's like, hey, have you ever read Berserk? That point where the demons start coming out into the world. Yeah. The world is like that now, and you would think like, oh, hey, there's gonna be so many more things to do, so much more to see. But it's actually most of the first half of the game, but just with like stronger enemies, and by that point you're so strong, like even the stronger ones are like, they're not.
I'm just gonna beat his ass anyway.
Yeah, it's also one of the reasons why when I reached the end game for Dragon's Dogma 2, I was a bit surprised that they didn't try anything more daring compared to the first game, because I honestly think they did something more creative in Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen, and even that wasn't all that amazing. But funny enough, what they did in Dragon's Dogma 2 is still only half as cool as what they did back then. So that's why, like, in my heart of hearts, I'm always thinking like, Itsuno-san, was there like developmental problems in this game's journey as well? Was there also like challenges in terms of like scope? Did you feel as if you tried to do too much in too short of a time? Because again, every video game development is always a compromise between resources and creativity. So it's like, okay, what can we do within the time and money given to us? And this feels like, oh my God, we finally get to make the game we want. And then halfway through, they're like, oh shit, we ran out of money. And we can just make the first game again, but prettier and a bit bigger.
Shinier.
And a bit shinier. But overall, it's not a bad game. It is. In fact, I envy people who will encounter this as his first Dragon Dogma, because I approached this colored by my opinions of Dark Arisen. And so I had expectations, very high expectations, because one thing about Dark Arisen is that the development is plagued with stories of, oh my God, we couldn't do XYZ because we ran out of time and money. And when this was announced, fans like me thought, hey, finally, Capcom trusts you guys to give you enough money to make whatever you want. Yeah. And then when it comes out, it's like, oh, wait, you made the first game again, but it's prettier. There are some new things, but it's kind of just the first game. Again, not entirely a bad thing, which is why I hope the success of this game is going to tell them, hey, let's make something new this time, because people love it. People love this weird stuff we made. And I guess other things I want to say about the game to cap off is that if you play this game and you feel that it's difficult, don't be afraid to cheese. Like, Dragon's Dogma is not supposed to be a game where you're playing by the rules and you're doing things all calculatively and carefully. No. If you find a way to cheese the game, cheese it. This is one of those games where you're supposed to be like, oh my God, I can exploit this. Yeah, exploit it. Because the game's gonna kick your ass. Just do it. Just do what you can. Like, I remember when Dark Arisen had like a duplication exploit where you can just make like infinite like potions or something. We all did it. Everyone in the community was like, yeah, just do it. Don't ever
all did it. Like, speaking on behalf of the 50 people that are like,
oh my God, talking about like cheese.
It was 20 of us.
I recall fighting my first dragon. I was scared shitless. I died many times. I had no HP. Everyone had no HP, but like, here's the kicker, right? There is a short like period of time where if you get hit and you lose HP and you press escape, you can like shove like health potions down your throat and be like, oh, I didn't die. Sorry, I didn't die.
Yeah.
Like, your HP goes to 0, but if you press escape fast enough, and you can chug down like health potions, and then you can continue fighting.
That's true.
That was what I did for my first dragon fight. It was tough. It was still tough, although I was cheesing it. But I was like, I don't give a shit, dude. I'm cheesing it. I'm just shoving everything. Every time I get hit, I'm like, pause.
Same. I do the same thing, which is why I keep telling everyone, whatever game you're playing, Dragon's Dogma, Elden Ring, whatever, don't let anyone tell you you're playing it wrong. As long as you're not inputting cheat codes directly and you're just like using whatever systems they gave you, just do it.
Yeah,
just beat the damn game. Like, if you play Baldur's Gate 3 and people were mocking you like, oh, you keep using explosive barrels to kill people, like, shut up. I'll
like Oppenheimer is my favorite show. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I will commit terrorism as much as I want. That's my role-playing fantasy.
See,
do not. Yeah,
that's another clip that I can't put out there on the internet. Yeah, I mean, all that to say is like, I think at the end of the day, this has been such an interesting one because I think we all come from not particularly different sides of the camp, but maybe like we're looking at the camp at different angles, but we're all kind of staring at the same camp, which is we're all kind of agreeing on what this game is offering and where does it sit in the larger like stack of games. But I think for me, oh yeah, go ahead, Burham. You want to round off another? Yeah,
one short thing.
Yeah.
For those people who are also getting into the game, take it slow. It's one of those games where think of it as you and a bunch of friends going on an adventure. Plan out your kit, make sure everyone's got their right equipment, everyone's bringing their health potions. It's one of those games where every other aspect of it feels like it's not going to stand up to your expectations of other games, like the storyline, the quest systems. It's there, but I wouldn't call it award-winning.
I love the stories.
They're weird, and I myself, I like them. But I think if you're somebody who typically plays games that have good and in-depth storylines, it's not going to be up to that level here. But what really shines in this game is the combat system and the adventuring, the feeling of going on an adventure. So take your time and don't resent the fact that you have to walk from town to town. Like, that's part of the adventure.
No.
Go through it. You don't have to sprint all the way, because I know some players are like, oh my God, I have to sprint all the way. Like, you don't have to. Wow.
No, the hike is horrible, especially when you've done it like a bajillion times. Do you know,
It's true.
I've done the hike from like Checkpoint Rest Town all the way to Patal like many times. I'm just, bro, this hike is long as fuck.
Just use the ox cart. Use the ox cart. Take the taxi.
I have sworn against this ox cart. Every time I pay 200 coin to sit on the ox cart, I take a nap. I wake up and I'm halfway there and the ox cart is destroyed. Yeah. I'm not. This is a fucking scam. It's a scam. And then the guy that drives the ox cart, he's just standing there like, I don't know what to do now.
That's his life.
It's so funny because every time the ox cart just blows up, his dialogue is like, "I'm sorry, Arisen, I can't take you there anymore." I'm like, "There's a griffin, bro. Of course you can't take me, but can you like run somewhere safe first?"
Yeah.
I don't give a shit about him, man. He scammed me on my money so many times. He's like, I'll take you there. I'll take you there.
I mean, like, again, this is such a fascinating discussion to me because, again, like, where I was going to sit at Dragon's Dogma 2 was like, I wasn't sure how I would feel about it. And I really wanted to hear, like, other people who have played more of the game. But it's so funny how, like, we're all kind of coming to the same conclusion, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't sound like we hate the game, right? Or that it's a bad game. Like, it's marred by different facets, whether it be, a time where you actually need to invest a lot of time in the game, but that's not something that we have right now in this current ecosystem of gaming, right? Where there's so many games that are coming out. I think all of the three of us and like everybody else who's probably listening to this are a little bit more oriented towards playing more games this year rather than just choosing one or two games that they play throughout the year. And then on top of that, like, there's so many new shiny things that are out there that, like, where does Dragon's Dogma sit and where does that experience sit on like your list of priorities? So I think it's very, like, again, fascinating, nuanced discussion on it. But I think at the end of the day, it's also like, do try it. Like, I'm not trying to be like, hey, this game is janky and trashy and that you shouldn't try it. Like, I'm still finding like very optimistic parts of the game. And I'll kind of close off like my experience, which is like, I want to call out the other co-hosts of the 20M podcast, Rino, who you all know are like the co-founder of this podcast and one of my favorite personalities and people in gaming. We tried Dragon's Dogma 2 the same week. We both tried to boot it up in the same like couple days. She said, and I'm going to call her out right here, I tried to beat a goblin. The goblin kicked my ass in the first couple of minutes. God. I got so pissed, I just turned on another game instead. She never went back to Dragon's Dogma. And I was like, goblin. But here's where it is. I was like, what a loser. Like, I'm a better gamer than Reno. Like, come on. Like, she's not a action RPG kind of, like, she doesn't play Souls games, like all that kind of stuff. I got this. And I told Reno, like, when I booted up the game, I got kicked. Like, that goblin shoved dirt into my mouth. Like, the entry level tutorial goblin just kicked my ass so much. And then I texted Reno. I was like, Yeah, you were right. Like, I'm sorry for judging you. This game is hard. Like, I couldn't beat the tutorial either. So it's a funny thing where it's like drop off or you need to drop off at the end of the day. But do try it and find the beauty in games like this and experiences like this. And I think Burhan, you put that like so eloquently. But I think Rach, you're kind of right, and we sit in the same bucket here. Whereas I want to get to the state where you are with this game. I don't know if I'll love it, but I kind of want to get to it. I'll close this episode off by like kind of throwing it back to you all. Where can people find you? What's coming up for you guys that you want to share with the community of the 20M podcast, and what's going on in your lives? Dragon's Dogma 2 or not Dragon's Dogma 2 related?
I'll let Rachel go first.
I'm not. Stardew Valley.
Just all your content is Stardew Valley oriented now.
I have my Dragon's Dogma 2 playthrough on my YouTube channel now.
Oh hell yeah, that's awesome, and that'll be here.
Yeah, it's at Pumpkin Unicorn, I think. But I just like sat down and edited a shit ton of fucking VODs. I'm people That's tired. Awesome. But yes, my Dragon's Dogma 2 playthrough will be out. I think it should be out already. It'll be a long ongoing series of my adventures in Dragon's Dogma 2. If you want to see me fuck around and find out, you should go over there.
And also, I just want to like say, if you are looking for artists, if you're looking for great art to purchase and consume as well, like please check out Pumpkin Unicorn stuff. I cannot emphasize that enough. Burhan, what about you? Where can people find you? Where can people find the review that you wrote for Access as well?
Oh, so the review that I wrote in Bahasa Melayu, if you can read Bahasa Melayu, it's going to be on Axis' website. So that's aksiz.com. So you can just go to the website and just search Dragon's Dogma 2. Probably my review is the first thing that pops up because I believe it's the latest thing. Oh, wait, sorry. They have an article on the patch, but I think it should be below that. My review should be below that. And if you want to find me, I'm mostly yapping on Twitter. I am, again, Burhan Plays. That's BURHANPLAYS. Occasionally, I stream on Twitch. I'm currently trying to revive my YouTube channel. I'm very passionate about game development and analyzing game flows and structures. So currently, I am in the middle of making a video on Valkyria Chronicles, a PS3 game from 2000. Yeah, I'm going to make a video analyzing the structure and flow of the gameplay of Valkyria Chronicles. And I don't have anything else to shout besides if you are in Southeast Asia like we are, the weather is really, really hot right now. So if you have stray animals, cats, dogs, in your area or wherever you go, please, if you are able to afford to, bring wet food in your car and have some plastic cups or plates so that you can place food and water for these animal friends of ours, because currently, because of the weather, it's really, really tough on them. So yeah, please look out for animals around you. And even better, if you have any trapped, neuter, and released tier TNR programs around your area, please do support those.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think like other than the games and sometimes political commentary that you put on Twitter as well, it's like the amount of cats that you're helping and pet friends that you're helping, Burhan, is admirable. And I know Rach and June also like just are huge advocates for that kind of stuff. So God bless. Well, I think on our side, thanks everybody for watching this discussion, this review, this magnanimous back and forth between Pumpkin Unicorn, Burhan,
this yap session.
This yap session of Dragon's Dogma. Again, major love thank you so much to Capcom for providing us review copies for this. And honestly, like despite the positives and the negatives, like I'm really curious to see where this discussion is going to go in the future. But if you want to watch an episode of the 20M podcast that's not Dragon's Dogma 2 oriented or involves the better half of the 20M podcast, who am I kidding, right? Like literally like a Reno-centric episode where Reno has an existential crisis.
Reno is the best.
Valhalla and
to make up for this episode, I need to be invited again, but only with Reno next time.
With Reno.
Yeah. I'll come back with Reno.
Me and Rachel needs another episode, but with Reno.
When maybe we can't do it when Earth 3 comes out because Reno doesn't play.
Reno says no, but she should still record the episode like for the Earth 3 review. But if you want to check out some of the older episodes of the 20M podcast featuring a couple other guests, but specifically our last episode on Valhalla and the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood, please go check that out. It's very Reno oriented, so major love to her. But thank you both for jumping on this one, and for the rest of the folks listening to the podcast, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.